back, everybody, to the Brian Foltis Behavioral Finance Podcast. My name is Dr. Brian Foltis, and I'm an Associate Professor of Finance at Butler University in Indianapolis, Indiana. And today, we're going to be continuing our conversation on retirement savings and some retirement plan design. And all of this is to try to educate you in order for you to make better decisions with your money and savings and in life in general. So thanks very much for watching today. And if you haven't done so, can you please subscribe and like? I would much appreciate it. As we were talking in our last podcast, we're learning on how we're going to make things grow little by little, moving the needle one at a time. And part of what I'm trying to do is get the word out about behavioral finance and try to spark some excitement for this interesting topic, although with an idea that this is going to help you with your money. And if you're managing people's money, then your clients and those around you as well. As you remember, we talked last podcast, building a couple reasons why we don't save. We were trying to lay that foundation of the problems and some of the reasons on how we might be able to overcome these impediments here. We talked about last time the procrastination and lack of self-control. And this is just basically, I'll start tomorrow, or on the other hand, we have this entitlement saying, well, little Jimmy, my son needs to have, a $400,000 education to learn his letters and count to 10 for preschool. So these were the things that we were talking about, and I gave you that nice update on getting married recently, and I am now enjoying this as I'm recording this. This is my final week of summer vacation before going back to campus next week and starting classes, and I feel really energized and refueled. I'm ready to go back and get into that. I teach one section of behavioral finance, and then I also teach two sections of international financial management, so international finance. So 3 classes, Tuesday and Thursday. I'm going to knock them all out back to back to back with a little bit of a break in between. And so I'm usually on campus Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then if I'm not there for meetings, then I'm around here doing home office stuff. As I've may or may not have said before, it's a pretty nice job being a professor, and what I find most interesting or most satisfying about it is the ability to help people, not just through the content, but through building relationships with students, both active current students and former as well. Anyway, we're going to jump right in because there's a lot to cover, and I got pretty passionate about talking about how things grow again and how we're trying to get people with no savings. How can we get them to save that first $1,000 by changing how they think about things? One other thing that I do in class around this point in class is we're trying to get people to think about how to save. I want them to go through this exercise before they start their first job. And what I ask them to do is, they're mostly juniors and seniors. So the seniors, if they already have a job lined up, then they know what they're going to make. They know some of their salary. They know some of the benefits that they get. Those who don't, I say just make up a number. If we say $60,000 a year, that's a pretty reasonable number for finance students, and it just works out nicely because that comes out to $5,000 a year, $5,000 a month. $60,000 a year, $5,000 a month. And what I ask them to do is estimate first how much they think their paycheck will be per month, each month. And that's why I like to use the $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year. How much do you think you're going to receive in net paycheck each month? And they kind of go, they get a little overwhelmed. So we start digging through this because I want them to know this before there's an important reason why we need to know this beforehand. Start going through this process. Go, well, you've got federal income taxes, Social Security taxes, Medicaid, all these contributions. Those will come out. You have your health insurance, most likely, that you'll be on for the first time. Dental insurance. Sometimes you'll have vision. There's sometimes a life insurance policy built in on this. And so now all of a sudden I back off because now they're starting to get overwhelmed. But even if we just start with the main ones, I put them online and show them the net paycheck calculator based on the state that they're going to be working in. So I'll post that link below in case anybody wants to see what that would look like, at least in the United States. And you'll be able to see what that would do. And then think about if you take out a retirement contributions, that'll come out of your net paycheck, that it's tax deductible. So you don't get totally taxed on it, but it definitely takes a chunk out of your paycheck. And what I try to tell students, as long as we're on the topic of retirement contributions, so I tell them you're going to fall into one of two categories when you graduate college. One category is those of you who have student loans, and the other category are those of you who don't have student loans. If you don't have student loans, I tell them there is no reason that you can't contribute 10 to 15% of your paycheck. You want to become an automatic millionaire without having to do anything. You don't have to come up with any new business ideas. You just go to work, put your 10 to 15% in and invest it. And it's just a matter of time. And the reason you want to set this up first is because if you wait to start your retirement savings or your retirement contributions, we're going to start dealing with what we call paycheck loss aversion. You're going to receive that paycheck, and now you're going to be used to spending that money or having the ability to spend that money. So when you finally take a 10 or 15% contribution, you are going to see anywhere from an 8 to 12% reduction or a loss in your paycheck. And that's going to hurt. So before you even know what your paycheck is going to be, I encourage you to sign up 10 to 15%, and then you're on your way. The other category of students are those who have student loans. Now, this is where it gets a little trickier. And they say, well, I still want to contribute to my retirement. I don't want to do anything, but I also now have these student loans, and there's a lot of conflict around this. And my coaching for those students is I ask them if your employer provides any sort of contribution match. And sometimes they know this answer and sometimes they don't. I ask them, go find out what your employer will do to match. So in the United States, sometimes employers will match 3%. First 3% of your contributions. So you put in 3, the employer will match it 100%. They'll give you 3%. So your total contribution is 6 of your total net or your total gross paycheck. And if that's the case, whatever the number that your employer will match is the number that I urge you to take. And the rationale behind that is, look, I know you've got student loans. We need to get those out of your life as soon as possible. But I tell you what, in the world of finance, there are no guaranteed 100% rate of returns. I told you in the last podcast, there's no such thing as 20%. There's no such thing as 100%. So if your employer is giving you a match of 100 or 50%, even with student loans, I would urge you to take it up to that amount. And then what you'll do is we'll build a plan on how you are going to work on getting those student loans out of your life as soon as possible. Once you get done with your loans, whatever money you are rolling in to those loans can now be reallocated. So if you're pumping in $500 extra dollars a month to your student loans without changing your lifestyle, that converts to extra retirement savings when you get done with that. When you get done with those student loans, it rolls over, and now all of a sudden you're making catch-up contributions with your 401k and your retirement contributions. So that's where we talk about how much to save. And the other thing, going back to, I know there's a little bit of a tangent, but when you think about a $5,000 net paycheck, once you start running some just traditional health insurance and taxes, maybe a retirement contribution, a lot of us get down to around $3,600. I've seen it in different states, wherever they're working, anywhere from $3,500 to $3,700 seems to be a pretty appropriate number of what their net paycheck is going to be. So $3,600 or $3,700, that is 72 to 74%. 36 is 72%. 37 is 74%. You're only going to take home around 75% of what that sticker price is for your salary. And the reason I want us to go through this first number is because if I know that I'm making $3,600 a month, when I start house hunting or start looking for apartments and I'm starting to formulate my budget, I am not working under the assumption that, hey, I've got $5,000 rolling in. And if I get a $2,000 a month apartment, that's already 40%. That's still a bit too high. But if we even did $1,500 or $1,800, just for simplicity purposes, $1,800, that's 36% of your gross number. But $1,800 is literally half of your net paycheck. So just by shifting and doing this little exercise, and maybe I want them to do this before they've signed that lease, before they've taken on that car loan, that look, every month you're going to be bringing in $3,600 from your $60,000 a year job. Let's use that $3,600 to allocate at least roughly a budget. And you would think most students would have some ideas around this. And this is where I'm telling you there's a tremendous opportunity for us to learn and to help people with experiential learning before they're actually going to learn the hard way. Because I have a lot of students going, hey, Fultus, what? How much do people pay in the real world for once I get out of my own apartment? How much is my cell phone going to cost me? And how much is auto insurance going to cost me? How much is, well, you talk about YouTube TV and Netflix. How much are all these things going to cost? And I can tell them, it's like, well, the YouTube TV is $84 and Netflix is now up to $18 and you can't share that anymore. All these different expenses that need to be addressed. And what we're doing, though, is we're just giving them a reality check before they start making decisions based on their gross paycheck. And I've also noticed that it's a little bit humbling for them, but it's also really enlightening. And I think they learn a lot about it. So the next step that we do with this is not to make them feel any worse about themselves, but I also tell them, all right, you're making $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year. We know our net number a month. Now, I want you to calculate, assume you're going to work however many hours you think, 40 hours as in the US is pretty average for an entry-level job. Some will work more, some will work less. But how many dollars per hour net will you make? how many dollars an hour net would you make? And I tell them, let's just assume let's just round it. There's four weeks in 4 weeks in a month, $40, 40 hours a week. That's 160 hours a month because, we have a little bit of vacation here in the United States. And if I'm making $3,600 a month, dividing that by 160, my net hourly paycheck or earnings is $22.50. I want to know that number in my head, $22.50, because I can now base some of my spending decisions on that number. And the question I want you to ask yourself, and I want my students to ask themselves, is if you have a $100 product, so this could be an experience, going out to eat, a pair of shoes, whatever that might look like, want you to ask yourself, is it worth working for 5 hours in my job in order to pay for this? If you can say, hell yeah, it is, it's totally fine, buy it. But if you can't, either wait, sleep on it, or walk away from this. And so I bring this into the position of, you want a car loan? So car loans are now anywhere from $700 to $800 on average a month. So if we just even use a conservative number, let's say it's $600 a month, because you want a nice car. Well, 600 divided by 22.5 comes out to 26 2/3, which tells me you are going to work 26 2/3 hours for the car that you are driving to and from work to pay for that luxury or the ability to get your ass to work. And when you think about it, some of us like our jobs, some of us, I love it. But I know I've had jobs that you have Sunday night scaries. Those things are real and you don't like it. I'm going to have a real honest conversation with myself about some of the spending decisions. Do I really need to work 27 hours to pay for a vehicle that's literally going to take me to a job that I don't like? And I've seen it in my own experience. I already told you that I haven't never spent this much, but for our dinner after our eloping, we went hog wild. It was wonderful. Appetizers, drinks, champagne, the desserts afterward. We just went nuts. It was awesome. And it was $400, $410 after tip. And I didn't bat an eyelash because I knew that was an experience. I knew that we will never forget that. We were all just loving it, and I felt blessed that we could just pay for it and didn't hurt me anything. There are some times, though, where if you're going out to eat too much, sometimes you have a dinner that's just very underwhelming. I remember we have there's a Buffalo Wild Wings here that, not to knock them, sometimes those wings are really good, and I need that for my soul. There are other times where we would go there, and it's totally underwhelming, and I'm walking out the door for 4 of us, paying nearly $100, where I'm going, wait a minute, based on these numbers, those aren't my numbers, but I'm going to work how many hours for that experience? No, we're eating in next time. That's what we're going to do. But I just want us to think there's some times where we go out and you just want to think that fun Friday night that you went to, is it worth working that amount of hours? Sometimes your answer is yes. You want to go see Taylor Swift. That number gets pretty high, but that becomes a question of, is this experience worth working this amount of hours? But it's also really important just thinking about some of these big decisions that we're talking about with cars and with renting, especially when we're younger in our careers. So the third thing is what we call this lack of understanding of our asset allocation and risk in general. Now, this is another reason this is our third reason why we don't save. And one of the things we think about is this framing issue. So some of the individuals we've seen that watch news every day or the CNBC every day, that's myself included, and get really emotional because each day the market, historically, market is up 55% of the time, it's down roughly 45% of the time on a day-to-day basis. Oh, if you're watching that every day, you're experiencing losses on, let's just say 40%. So 2 days every week out of 5, you're going to experience loss. And those losses trigger emotion, and those kind of responses trigger bad decisions, not designed for long-term wealth growth. And if we even looked at our market once a year, so at the end of every year, the overall stock market historically in the United States has been up 60% of the time and down 40% of the time. And the 5-year stock returns, if we took a wider view, that becomes 95% positive, 5% negative. If we opened a window of 30 years, that becomes essentially close to 100% and 0%. Now, the reason we say this is we get so involved and we look at historical data with such a short-term lens that it really leads us into emotional decisions where if I'm sitting down with myself or with a client and you have 30 years to let this thing grow, well, we can be more risk seeking than if we have a 1-year time horizon for a short-term investment. We have to be more risk averse there. So people understanding asset allocation, and what tends to happen is younger people, they don't really know, and so they tend to be too conservative, and then they realize, oh, well, my stock allocation is growing really fast and my bond is not. And so over time, we just get to the point where we want to see it grow and we like seeing it growing. And as we get older, most investors actually become more risk seeking or risky in their portfolio allocation, where you have some 90-year-old guys going, the stock market's been good to me my whole life. I'm just going to stick it out. And we're going, wait a minute, can we at least, please, Mr. Jones, can we just have a small portion of that so you can have some certain income or fixed income without having to deal with market volatility? And usually we can try to convince them for a little bit, but once you experience how much stock market gains can amplify your portfolio, you get kind of addicted to it. And people, when they should be going more conservative, they just go full throttle into their retirement years. Number 4 is naive diversification. This is something we've talked about before. People don't know how to set up their allocation because of what is provided. They'll just take one of everything. This is our diversification heuristic. Just give me one of everything. And if the menu happens to be 50% stocks and 50% bonds, then I guess I'm just going to be 50-50. And it's dictated by what's offered, not what actually my true risk preference is. And what's further complicated about this is some of the names of these fund offerings are a bit misleading, and it gets people really confused on what, if I am sitting down with somebody, and we've talked about this before, we say, all right, at the bare minimum, I want to be 75% stocks, 25% bonds. Fair enough. And there are different allocations. You could go large cap, mid cap, small cap. You can go growth value, all these different things. But most people forget, they lose sight that all of those are still classified in stocks. So that 75%, all of those categories go into that stock bucket. Same thing with bonds. If I want to be 25% bonds, Well, if I have the government bond or corporate bonds or T bonds or whatever, that they all fit into that bond category. And I have to remember, I'm not going to allocate more than 25% to any of those categories. I can combine them or do whatever. Just remember, it all comes back to those two main categories. So people, not surprisingly, get very, very confused based on the subcategories of these asset classes. Furthermore, you get this kind of goes back to my days at Fidelity. That's where I can name some of the mutual funds, where you have the New Millennium Fund, okay? The Contra Fund, the Magellan Fund. Those are I remember those ones for the most part. I know the Balanced Fund, but when I mention any of those, Contra, Magellan, New Millennium, all right, these all sound great. What's in them? Is it stock or bonds? And now all of a sudden it starts to, if I get the Balanced Fund is designed to be around 50-50. Sometimes it gets to 60-40. Well, then how does that influence my overall stock and bond mix? Now, even I get confused with that. And I'd have to look, you have to do your research and you have to look and go, oh, okay, Contra Fund, New Millennium Fund, they're required to be at least 98% or more invested in stocks. So I go, oh, okay, stocks for those. I'll go into my stock category as I'm investing in those. But just because of naive diversification and how confusing it can be, those things can throw off even the most well-intentioned asset allocation mixes. So we've got all these issues, and we're trying to fix some of these things. Oh, a little bit of education goes a long way. That's always nice. But sometimes we're trying to do retirement plan designs to help people push them in the right decision without being what we call too paternal or too heavy-handed in this. And so we've already talked about a number of these things. This was actually called the SMartT plan. So us professors, we really struggle. We have good ideas, but sometimes our acronyms are a bit wishy-washy. So SMartT plan actually means save more tomorrow. So I don't know, we're just skip through the AR and just go right to the T. So it's save more tomorrow. Somehow we call it the SMartT plan. Well, it does address some issues, but it still has some outstanding areas of improvement. One of the issues was getting people to save. Just get them off the starting line. And the solution was, we're going to automatically enroll you. The default is you don't have to touch it. You're automatically enrolled. And we're going to start you at 3%. So that 3% is a number that you're not going to really feel it. And so you're not going to receive too much paycheck loss aversion. If you give up that 3%, you'll barely notice the difference. But at least we're going to start you out at 3%, get you started, and we're going to default you in. So all of this procrastination, the lack of self-control, it's been done for you. You don't have to do anything. In fact, you have to do something to get out of it. That's how you would get out of it. You actually have to fill out the paperwork. And getting people to save more. What the SMartT plan is designed to do is it's designed to increase your contribution rates when you get your annual review. And with your annual review, typically comes your annual raise or bonus. And so what that does is you'll do the default, at least it's been 2% every year. That also means that you don't have to touch anything. It's done automatically. If you get a 4% pay raise, then your paycheck will on net still increase. So you're not experiencing any losses or setbacks in your own paycheck. And that was the design. So if you continue on year after year, after 1 year, it's 5, 2 is 7, 3 is 9, 4 years, you're at 11%. you're in a nice position to keep going and max out your 401k every year. So we've already talked about, it's not a huge sacrifice because you start small. It eliminates our procrastination with automatic enrollment. The automatic increase doesn't make us feel that we're giving up anything because we don't lose anything on our paychecks. Now, the issues around this is in the United States, people are only staying in their job on an average of 3 years, which means the average contribution, even in a perfect world, after 1 year, it's 5. After 2 years, it's 7. And then on the third year, when it's supposed to be 9, you're gone. So you maxed out your contributions at 7%. If you go to another company that has a smart plan, you're starting at 3 again. So you're going to constantly, if you're moving to different jobs and it's starting you at 3%, you're going to constantly be under contributing and playing catch up with that. And there's some other issues, but in general, it's at least moving some people in the right direction and getting people to at least start saving a little bit. The problem of getting people to save right, so this asset allocation that we've talked about not being correctly allocated, we've made strides in what we call these target date funds. Target date funds, it's this one-size-fits-all fund that what you would do is you would choose your retirement date. And if I'm 42, it's 2023, I'll be 45. And so if I say I want to retire in 2045 when I'm 65 years old, then I'm going to come up with a target-based fund. So a Fidelity Freedom Fund is what it's called at Fidelity of 2045. What that does, it's a fund that will change the allocation over time to mirror what we should be doing, to be aggressive with our stocks, and then to rotate out of stocks into more conservative assets like fixed income and bonds as we near our retirement age. So at retirement, it's still around 50 or 60% in stocks because we still want some growth. But now we start having more exposure to our bonds. And it's what we call a set it and forget it kind of fund, where you can just invest in this fund. You don't have to worry about going in and changing your allocation over time or doing your rebalancing. It's going to be done for you. And so a lot of this on paper, that sounds fantastic. That's a great idea. Set it and forget it. Only going to put it in one place, and the money manager will take care of it. All I have to do is calculate when I want to retire, and it's done. And so that's good. However, I have to take both sides, right? As good as that is, there are a number of issues with these target-based funds. Number one, the expense fees are high. The expense ratios on these, I want to check it out here. I want to say, I know these have all come down quite a bit. I'm looking at the Fidelity Freedom 2045 Fund, FFFGX. And looks like the expense ratio is 0.75%. 0.75%, which doesn't sound like much, but if you've seen a previous podcast, if I'm comparing that to an index fund with 0.05%, that's a difference of 70 basis points. Over time, even for the next 20 years, that is going to decrease my final amount by approximately 20%. So that's a big ding for the benefits of this Freedom Fund. Sorry, Fidelity or Freedom Fund, but that's just math. The 75% basis point or 0.75%, 0.75% will ding you magnificently bad over time. Composition of the Freedom Fund. So this is me as a 42-year-old looking to work for another 22 years. I'm just making it up. They're going to drag me out of there. I love what I'm doing. There'll be a time, I'm sure, where I'll be like, man, I've done my stuff. I'm done. There'll be that time. But at this moment, I'm like, man, I love what I'm doing. They're going to have to drag my ass out of there when I get old. Asset allocation. Whoa. Okay. There is, I don't know how this has worked. Oh, shoot. Interesting. Asset allocation. This is as of end of June 2023. U.S. equities, stocks, 50.3%. Non-U.S. equities, 41.5%. So equity exposure is 91.8% in this fund. That is incredibly aggressive for somebody trying to retire in 22 years. That's not following the Vanguard Jack Bogle. I'll have to see what the similar one is for Vanguard. Not with you, but separately. And bond exposure, this is what's kind of, I said it was interesting. It's 11%. So if I'm doing that math, I'm like, we're at 100 and some percent, above 100. It's like, how does that? And then I see that they're actually short-term debt and other assets to the tune of 3%. So they have a negative position of 3.27%. And that's how it all equals out to 100. So that is super interesting in the Freedom Fund that they're actually shorting different investments, which I didn't even know that they could. Never mind. It's called short-term. Yeah, what is going on there? Yeah, they have net other assets in their asset allocation. I'm just reading this from their main page. Negative 4.54% is in this what is called net other assets. Might be to come back on the next podcast and figure out what the heck that is. But anyway, it's very aggressive. And so that might not match your true risk tolerance or asset allocation. So what they're telling people is they want 45-year-olds to be invested all in the stock market, or at least 91% in the stock market, which I feel is pretty heavy, to be honest with you. Anyway, that's what Freedom Funds both can do for you, but then with the expense ratios and possible inconsistent asset allocation. And then what we use these Freedom Funds for sometimes is it's supposed to be the one place, the one size fits all. But what we end up doing is we use the Freedom Fund as one of many assets in our portfolio. And then that just defeats the whole purpose of clearing up the asset allocation problem. In fact, it makes it more mucky because even within that Freedom Fund, there's a blend of different stocks and bonds that kind of make it less clear of our overall strategy. If we don't change our asset allocation, we have what is called wandering asset allocation. And I ran this before in a previous podcast, ran the numbers, but if you have a 25-year-old and they start 60% bonds or 60% stocks and 40% bonds, those stocks are going to earn 10% per year. And if those bonds are earning 4% a year, you do not touch your portfolio. You're starting at 60% stocks, 40% bonds. As it grows over time, you're going to come back in 30 years when you're 55 years old, and your portfolio allocation is going to be 89% stocks and 11% bonds, just because that grew so much faster for so long. And if you don't reallocate it or rebalance it, it's going to wander into a more aggressive asset allocation, which is what we said is not exactly the direction that you want to go into, because you'll be too conservative too early 60-40 is too conservative for most people, and it'll be too risky later on in life when it should be the opposite. So my final point today is, can you save too much? So this is comes back from a conversation that I had, a couple of conversations, but when I was just starting out as an assistant professor, I was flying to New Orleans for a conference, and I was sitting next to a guy who was a PhD student at the time at Carnegie Mellon, and he was working for Roger Lobenstein. So he's a really high profile, or a big name at least, in behavioral economics. And so we were talking to him, and I'll never forget, he was kind of like a Seinfeld reference, but he was a loud talker, and he voice just boomed through the whole airplane. And what I would try to do is I would try to mirror and talk softer, so then maybe he would try to talk, and it just never stopped. He would just keep coming so loud. Anyway, I really enjoyed the conversation with him, but what he was saying is, you people in behavioral finance, I have a big problem with you. I said, oh, what is that? I'm not taking anything personally. I said, your models of savings always say that for every additional dollar you save, your utility goes up. It never changes. So every additional dollar is always a positive utility in every way. And it almost seems like it never ends. And he said, and I know you guys smooth it over, and we've talked about that in a previous podcast, that, our first $10,000 give us more happiness than $10,000 after we've had $100 million in our bank. But he said, why doesn't anybody talk about like negative utility? Somebody who saves too much. And I thought about it. I was like, you know what? You're right. He said, think about somebody who is saving. You're working and you're saving 90% of your paycheck, but you are living in a cardboard box under a bridge. Is this, the behavioral models would say you're doing everything right because you're saving 90%. Keep going. If you do 91%, you're going to be even better. Well, at some point, there's a trade-off where you're giving up today's consumption or your well-being today. And he said, I think there's a point in the model where it converges, or it should goes down, where you are worse off by saving too much. And I really thought about that, and I was like, man, I think you're right. So I started thinking about saving too much, and I always think about the people who are saving for that glorious day when they're 65 years old and they get to tour Europe. And I've seen those tour buses, and I've seen the people walking or not walking off of those tour buses and where their bodies are, and going, man, that's what people work 40 years for, so they can hobble along a bus to see a sight and then get back on. Man, that's just no way to live. Or we've got it all wrong. And so I see what we call it the FIRE community. They're the Financially Independent Retire Early, FIRE. Now that's a community that can actually get their acronyms, unlike us academics who we'd like to just keep our letters off if it makes sense to us. But there's this often overlooked subpopulation of people who are really, really fired up about saving a ton of money. And if you're young and trying to really focus on, then and a lot of these FIRE communities they're going to save a ton of money in order for them to retire early or to live a good life. So they're really giving up a lot of their consumption for a very short term, for a longer term payout. And so I totally understand that. And I also have talked to people who are managing people's money, who have been such heavy savers for such a long time. And once they've saved so much money, They're there, they've done it, but then they can't change and actually spend it. So they just live their whole retirement, their whole rest of their lives, just penny pinching, and not just hoarding, basically, and just living this life. And people are telling them, the advisors going, look, you've done everything right. You can spend your money now. And they go, nope. And they don't want to do it. So I thought about that. Wow, what can we do to help these people? Or what would be a benefit? Because some of them, frankly, just want to pass it on to their kids or grandkids. But I think some of them don't really understand that they've already won. They've won the game. And what they've done, though, is if you are saving your money with what we call this scarcity mindset, if you're saving your money to build up this number, you're basically saying, in so many words, money is my source of security. Saving money is giving me security. And if you build that mindset, getting rid of that money is basically you're giving away your security. And this is why people, I believe, won't part with their money, because they've done everything. They've given themselves their sense of security, and to spend that would be giving it away. And they don't want to do it. And of course, we always say, well, if you don't want to fly first class when you're retired, then your kids are going to fly first class. That's just the way it is. So do you want to do it now, or your kids going to fly first class and your grandkids will? And see what they say there. Sometimes you can get people to go, you're right, I can do that. But what I've also talked about, I just had this idea, we were talking, and you know how we have savings goals and we work toward a certain number, we have these goals in mind, and then we reach that savings goal, and we have all this excess money, and if I'm managing somebody's money, what I've proposed is, instead of setting a savings goal, what if we gave these individuals a spending goal? Saying, look, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you need to spend this amount. You are never going to run out of money. We've ran the analysis, all the bad scenarios, all the what ifs. You can still spend this money and you will not be affected. And in fact, that's your spending goal for the year. You have to spend $150,000 a year. I don't care where you spend it or how you spend it, but you need to spend it on yourself. You can do it for your family, charity, but you need to spend this amount. And I want you just to test this. I want you to come back after a year, tell me how it feels. And my sense is that once people understand money is about flow, so letting it flow through you and living abundantly, abundance is flow. And once people, even late in life, can experience the joy you receive from giving and all the different things that start happening after you start that flow of money into other people's lives or into your own life, of the next level of happiness that they may not have ever experienced for their entire life. They get to experience that in their final years and can put some final pieces together. And so that's my challenge to those who are in that little subpopulation of having saved too much. And I remember, though, when I was buying my car, I had the problem of I was saving. I had money set aside, but I was so happy that I was earning 4.5% on my little money market just for my, $20,000 that I had earmarked for a car, that I didn't want to part ways with that money. And so I let my old car just go straight to hell, just to the point where I had to just literally tow it away off of out of my garage. And then I had to part ways with the money that I spent. And that was for me going, wait a minute, I'm not just teaching this. I need to learn the same principles that, man, I'm going to be grateful that I can pay this money, that I have this money, and now I have a nice car that's reliable, that my kids aren't embarrassed about, can change that mindset, and it brings another element or another layer of happiness and joy into our lives. All right, so I'm going to conclude here today. That finishes the material that I wanted to cover, and I know the fire community is really good. There's some really good stories that are coming out of that. I tried, and I'll talk more in future podcasts about really more explicit my own personal finances and my journey, my mindset around it, because I am not a professor who is not living what I'm talking about. I'm on the front lines living this out every day. And sometimes I I learn from my mistakes. That's where I get some of my ideas from. But I also said, look, I'm not going to be that broke professor who is teaching finance, telling what people should do, but not doing it myself. And so I do a number of things myself that I'll be sharing over the course of this podcast. And I'm looking forward to going into more depth about that and just being as transparent as possible to hopefully encourage you to do the same and save money and make good decisions, but also with a purpose in mind of why we're doing this and what we're using money for in a greater sense. It's not just hoarding it and being that miserly old person that won't pay for anything or won't be generous, and that's a miserable person that I don't want to be like. So we're going to be the opposite of that. Anyway, we've gone long today. Thank you very much for listening. And if you need me for anything, please do not hesitate to reach out on Instagram or brianfoltis.com. If you need me to come teach your class or speak to your group, hit me up. I am booking out for not just fall of 2023, but we're looking into 2024, starting to fill up the calendar, and hope to be busy making a positive impact on people with their own finances. So if that's anything I can do for you, please let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you next Tuesday for our final, I believe, installment of the behavioral finance course content. Then we're moving into even better stuff. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.